welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. I am your host, Steph Sia, aka Kimchi on stage. I will be dancing on stage sometime this month, next month. I believe this episode's at the time of recording. We're recording in late June. I'm trying to have a summer, so I'm trying to get a lot of episodes out. But I think it should be August when this episode is out. So catch me on stage at one of the local clubs here in Vancouver, Canada. If you find yourself passing through, or if you live here, come chat with me, come say hi, chat about the show. I love it when people do that. It's happened more often than not. So I really enjoy those conversations. Come find me. Everything's on my Instagram if you are interested in that. I am also a digital content creator. I'm also was also a former sugar baby a long time ago, almost a decade ago. And I chat about those experiences in my earlier episodes and bonus episodes in the past 4 seasons. So I bring the show to you, the listener, because I'm trying to do my little part in the industry in terms of trying to destigmatize sex work, because our work is highly stigmatized. A lot of people often don't understand the work that it is that we do. And I'm just trying to bring real people on and, just get the real story and also get their lived experiences and allow them to have the space to speak about this kind of stuff in a very transparent fashion, because that's just the way that I roll. So a couple things before we get into this week's guest. Wow, I really cannot speak today. I am sorry. I haven't recorded a podcast in like a week and a half, so I feel a little bit rusty. But before we get into our exciting guest this week, a couple announcements here. Obviously, if you have been a listener for a while, you will know I do have a Patreon, and that's where you will find the video exclusive to this episode and all the episodes from season 4 onwards. And I just wanted to give some of our top tier patrons a little shout out, because when you are in the top tier, not only do you get all of the access to all the bottom tiers, but you also get some fan recognition on the show. So I just want to say hello and a big, big thank you to Jay Suncern from BC. We also have Justin Erickson all the way from, I believe, Vancouver, Washington. And we also have Arip Sarkar, who's also here, based in BC. And Snoo, who I believe is based in Germany. So thank you so much for supporting the show, adding your comments and all your feedback for all the episodes. I really super appreciate that. If you are interested in our Patreon account, it's just a little thing that you can do to help support the show. It is patreon.com/stripped by Sia. And also another quick announcement here. I'm also now on the Skyhawk After Dark TV and radio network as well. So Skyhawk After Dark, you can find that online. I believe it's Skyhawk After Dark TV.com. That is all about adult industry related podcasts, YouTube channels, video, all that kind of content, all in one area. I'm super excited to be a fun part of this exciting group of people. So shout out to Brian, who hooked me up, and Lily, who I had met, Lily Craven, who I had met back at the Why Not reunion in Tempe this past April. So thank you for connecting with me and getting me on your fantastic network. Feel free to give them a check out and a peep later on after this conversation. So I'm sorry this is so much longer. It's like double the length of time that I usually speak about myself, and I promise the rest of the hour will not be speaking about myself. I'm excited to bring on this week's guest, who I connected with on Twitter and through actually the CBC, who interviewed me I guess now back in June at this rate, where they asked my opinion on what do you think about the economy and the recession, and like how the stripper index is what they like to call it, how that can be an indicator or telltale times of the recession, because people aren't going out as much, people aren't as tipping, etc. And the host of that show, The Cost of Living, Paul Havershood, he actually mentioned this week's guest, who is Lula Blue, and I think he has actually interviewed you before in the past, and you're like his go-to, and he had nothing but great things to say about you. And I'm just like, why does that name sound familiar? And I'm like, I'm not sure if I know who that person is. And then I went on Twitter, and it turns out I was already following you, and we were already following each other. So the world is so small. I am so very excited to bring Lula Blue onto the show. Lula is a full service sex worker. She's also an advocate, an activist, a queer sex worker as well, volunteer. She's on the advisory committee at SHIFT in Calgary, which is a nonprofit organization, which she will be speaking about later on in today's show. But I'm very excited to bring her on because I've just heard so many great things, and I had so many comments everywhere that were like, oh my God, she's going to be amazing. Like, I have no questions, but I just want to say how amazing she is. So welcome to the show, Lula Blue.
Hi. Oh my God, that was such a cute introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's so funny, like how this came about, like us meeting each other this way. Like you said, like we were already following each other, and it was really funny because a few weeks ago I was speaking on a panel for, well, not quite a panel, like kind of a guest in a lecture for University of Calgary, and leading up to guesting on that in those lectures, I was kind of like, I want to reconnect with some sex work activism. So your podcast was something that I had saved on my Spotify for so long that I needed to listen to. And so I had listened to quite a few, like binge listened to quite a few episodes of you leading into that. And then like the day after you had messaged me on Twitter saying that you had been in contact with Paul and everything. So yeah, so hilarious. Like I was like, wow, I've just been listening to your voice for the last like 4 days leading up to this. So weird.
The world is so small.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Yeah, Paul interviewed me 2 years ago, kind of in the midst of the pandemic. I think we were in the second or third wave of the pandemic at that point. It was like in the fall. And a friend of his, Marcello DeCinto, had interviewed me for a couple of articles that summer. So he had actually connected me with Paul from CBC. So that was, yeah, so many connections.
Cool.
It's
Oh my
really cool.
gosh. Well, it's so cool. And like, yes, you do a lot of activism in the city that you are based. And I will not name the city in just case for privacy reasons and whatnot. But you do a lot. And it's just, I am so excited to hear about all the things in your own words, not just the things that I've read online. But can you tell the audience in your own words and your own terms about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah. I can also say, like, I can mention, if you don't feel comfortable mentioning things on my behalf, I can mention them later. I'm pretty open. I'm very, like, out as a sex worker. I'm face out as a sex worker. And so, yeah, I don't mind mentioning that I am from Calgary, Alberta. Um,
Yay.
Sorry, what was your other question in
Oh
that?
yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean,
Got
also
distracted.
shout out to you for my fellow Canadians here. I'm so excited to have another Canadian on the show because it's been like a long time since I had another Canadian. So I was like, yay! The question was, who are you in your own words in terms like what it is that you do, and tell the audience all that.
Yeah, so like I said, you had already kind of done a really perfect introduction. That's usually kind of the intro that I go with, is that I'm a full service sex worker. So that means that I meet my clients in person and I have intimate sexual contact with my clients. The reason why we use these umbrella terms, sex work, full service, is that we don't want to subscribe to um, the structure of the hierarchy, which puts oftentimes outdoor full service workers at the bottom of a pyramid, and anyone who has less and less physical contact with their clients up at the top of the pyramid. This structure is really damaging to our community. It causes a lot of lateral violence. So yeah, when we're using terms like this, that's the reason why. I like to use the umbrella term of sex worker in general. I do sometimes do content creation. I kind of burnt myself out on OnlyFans, to be honest, during the pandemic. So I haven't been posting on there as frequently. So it's just like my library of nudes at this point. But
Me
it's still
too.
available. Yeah, very relatable. I think a lot of people kind of had that same pivot with their online services. I also offer virtual services. So like phone, sex over the phone, or just like catch up phone calls, video calls, either just socially or sexually. I do a text message package of just like check in text messages throughout the day. I also do love letter packages. I send Polaroid photos, yeah, through the mail. Um,
Oh, I love that.
yeah,
That's just
Yeah, my virtual services, I started offering like I mentioned, like through the pandemic when we kind of had to do that pivot from in person to online stuff for a while.
mhm.
And I really enjoyed doing the virtual stuff, so I've kept that on my website as options for services, and it's been really nice for like long distance clients or
Mhm.
clients that just aren't comfortable coming to see me in person yet, or just people that are saving up money to come see me because it's fucking expensive. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
so
yeah,
cool.
I'll be
And
the first one to
also
admit that. Yeah, yeah,
well, no one ever talks about that too because, like, they just see dollar signs, a lot of the times, and I just feel like sometimes people just view themselves. I mean, we are all queens for sure, and we do like you should be able to know your value and what you're worth, but it is really expensive, and for you to get regulars on an ongoing basis, like that's a really hefty chunk of change.
yeah, yeah. I consider anybody that has seen me more than once to be a regular, even if you see me once every 2.5 years. You're still a regular of mine. You're still one of my lovers, and yeah, I don't mind people having to take some time in between to save up money because it's an expensive investment, but it's worth it if that's what you're after. Yeah.
Definitely worth it for sure. And we'll plug all your links and handles and all that stuff at the end of the show. But also, if you are like looking at this or listening to this on your phone or whatnot, all the links are in the show notes as well. So go peep Lula's website and all that stuff too. So I really wanted to kind of get into things with you and also just to learn more about you and your experience and also just your personal story as well. So I am always curious. And of course, if you've listened to the episodes before, will always know like where did this all begin for you in terms of sex work? How did you get started? And the audience is always interested in hearing your story. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll try not to go into too crazy detail or like certain stories just because of for time's sake.
Oh, it's
We
okay.
have a
I
limited
love
amount of time
details.
that we can
Don't
talk
worry
about this.
about it. I'll gatekeep. So it's
Okay, okay. I'll leave you in charge of keeping me on track. So, I got into the sex industry about 6 years ago. I feel like through the pandemic, like time has been I have a really hard time keeping track of years and months and stuff like that. So if any of this sounds inaccurate, it might be. Uh, just because I'm trying to remember like what years and stuff. So I think it was like 2016, in October 2016 that I first got a job with an agency here in Calgary. I had found this job opportunity on Craigslist. I was looking for porn like agencies to work with at the time because I wanted to do porn. But then I realized that Calgary, Alberta, Canada isn't really a huge hub for, and it wasn't at the time, definitely, still isn't a huge hub for porn agencies. So I kind of gave up on that right away, realizing I'd have to like move to the United States probably for that. Anyway, so I found this escorting agency that was hiring escorts, and it said like legal licensed agency in Calgary offering outcall services. And I was like, legal? Like, I thought that prostitution was illegal. So I started researching into a bunch of things and going onto a lot of Reddit forums. And um, I think at the time I was on Tumblr. So I was following a lot of like escorts on different Tumblr blogs talking about getting into the industry and stuff like that. So once I educated myself a little bit about it, as much as you could at the time, um, I started working with this agency. So they were out call only, which means that they were only able to send providers to visit the client. So the clients have to host wherever they're at, if it's at their home, if it's at a hotel room, if it's in semi truck, a camper van, whatever. You're
name
going to the
it.
client. So this is kind of like the term call girl, where you call a phone number. The agency will then call the provider that you're either trying to get in contact with, or it's on the schedule, or just whoever's available. So I would call the client back, confirm the booking, explain my services. The rates were set by the agency, and then I would have to coordinate with a driver of the agency's choosing, go to the clients, have my booking, get back in with the driver, go home, sort of thing. So this all seemed great to me, and yeah, just kind of like as the story goes on with working with a few agencies at the beginning of my career, I had a lot of like really negative experiences working with those agencies. I didn't have a lot of coping skills to cope with some of the things that were happening to me. I was 21 years old, so I was an adult. I was doing this of my own volition. I was not coerced into getting into sex work in any way. That being said, I was definitely taken advantage of in this situation by this agency. And, my naiveness around the industry, some of the stigmas that I carried around sex workers in general, even though I had a very like positive view of sex work, I think, than more so than the average person, I still carried a lot of stigmas that society held against sex workers. So, sort of leading into like my value for myself, my self-esteem, like how did I view myself as a sex worker? And so all of these kind of factors played into when horrible things would start to happen. I kind of felt like I deserved it. I put myself in this situation. Of course, this is going to happen. It's just a side effect of the job. Like all of these things being told, if you can't handle this, this, and this, how are you supposed to make money? So yeah, horrible things that are
Mhm.
not true. And,
Yes.
being independent now, realizing how much of that was just absolutely not the case and didn't have to be the case for me. And I find that it's like my biggest passion now is to try to like educate newer sex workers as much as I can, or just help advocate for sex work in any way that I can, to the general public, so that people understand that those types of things are not just side effects of the job. They don't have to be,
Mhm.
and that there is a healthy way to work in this industry. So yeah, during that time, I think leading up to that, I had issues with uh, substance abuse, mainly alcohol for me. I would use alcohol to cope with any life situation. I would use it to celebrate. I would use it when I was stressed out. I would use it out of boredom. I would use it when I was angry, like all of these different factors. I would use it when I was tired and I needed to
Yeah.
like get through certain events or whatever. Another main thing that I used alcohol for was social anxiety. I suffered greatly. I still suffer with this, but less so now. I have a lot healthier ways to cope with it. But yeah, social anxiety was a big one for me. Dealing with going out to parties or meeting new people, or yeah, just making new friends. I really struggled with that. So drinking was definitely the lubricant to
Right.
get stuff like that
Speak
going.
with
And
courage.
then getting sex work, was
Mhm.
very nervous, meeting
Yes.
my clients in person, didn't have a lot of guidance, didn't really have anybody there to show me how to do what I was doing, just kind of had an agency call me and tell me to go to this guy's house, and I had to figure all the rest of it out on my own. And so sometimes alcohol was a bit of a lubricant there too. I tried at the beginning to have boundaries around that, of like, okay, don't drink with your clients. And then that kind of slowly bled into like, okay, don't get drunk with your clients. You can drink with them, but don't get drunk with your clients. And then it started bleeding into like, okay, you can get drunk with these clients, but not these ones. So it's like started to kind of get really blurry, really fast. Being an independent contractor, not really being held to like a set schedule, really, not really having any consistency with work or having to wake up at a specific time or like anything like that. Um, it sort of gave me more and more excuses to drink, day drink, drink all day, binge drink for a few days. I wasn't held accountable to anybody.
Right.
Sex work is also extremely isolating. So especially at the beginning, I wasn't out to everybody that I knew. So, not being able to kind of share the experiences that were happening, or, talk about my job to anyone else, or even just the fact that like my schedule was very different from friends and family. So when everybody else is at work or sleeping, I'm bored and awake and, want companionship or want to hang out with friends or want to do things. So
Yeah.
drinking was definitely one of those things that I used to cope with the loneliness and isolation of sex work as well.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. So got into the sex industry 2016. When did I get sober? I think I started to realize I had a significant problem with drinking, with more so like trying to stop drinking. Like anytime I would be like, okay, something really fucked up happened. I think I really need to like take a break from drinking alcohol. That started to get more and more difficult to take a break. So I would take, like a month break or like a few weeks or only drink on the weekends or try to only drink for special occasions, like these types of things. But then that special occasion would come around. I would drink for that occasion, but then I would drink for 3 or 4 days afterwards as well.
Mm,
So that's what we kind of call like the binge drinking
right.
behavior. I think in the summer of 2018, I went on a trip to Europe and I was backpacking with a good friend of mine. And on this trip was the first time I started noticing like withdrawal symptoms from alcohol.
Really?
So if we would have kind of like a few days of drinking and then I had a break from drinking, like maybe even just a day, or even just the morning, like not having a beer in the morning, I started to notice my body was like kind of shaky and just like really like, and it would feel better immediately as soon as I had a beer.
Yeah.
My friend also mentioned to me that she started noticing we would be out somewhere. I would be super quiet and shy until the waiter brought me my beer. And even without drinking the beer, just the like having it set down in front of me, my attitude would completely change. I would be really confident, really outgoing, super talkative with strangers. And so she found that to be really interesting. It had nothing to do with me even being drunk. It was just like
Just
the
having it there.
connection. Yes, yes. So that was kind of the first time I started noticing like withdrawal symptoms. I went to a music festival a few weeks after I got back from that trip. And when I got back from that music festival, the withdrawal symptoms were a little more intense. Yeah, it was at this point that I was like, okay, I need to like actually told all my friends, I'm going to take a significant break from drinking. I'm not going to drink for the entire month of September. I need you guys to support me in this. Don't like invite me out. Don't like, you know what I mean? Like I just need to like really focus on it. And what ended up happening was I made it, I think, like 7 days into my goal month, and then a friend from out of town came into town, and we went out. I had one drink that night,
That was it.
and then the next morning I was like, I only had one. I'm so proud of myself. I did so good. And then that day that I was so proud of myself for only having one drink the night before, I immediately went into like a 4-day bender. Ended up doing drugs too, and like kind of like was coming down off of like MDMA and cocaine and obviously alcohol like 4 days later, and was just like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? Um, that time I like really freaked out my roommate, not really telling her where I was or when I was going to be coming home, when previously that had never been an issue. I was always very reliable when it came to stuff like that, and making her really scared for my safety was definitely something that I was like, okay, that is a big deal.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this at this point I was like, okay, clearly I can't get sober on my own. Clearly I need like some sort of help outside of this. And I had a family member who was, in the addiction sort of industry, addiction services,
Yeah.
like helping people with addiction. I don't want to say addiction industry. I feel like that's the liquor store. Um, but anyway, so I had a family member that worked in addiction, so I was pretty educated about how like treatment looked, how addiction therapy looked like, going to meetings, support group meetings, stuff like that. So um, kind of already knew what that world would look like. So I wasn't like was nervous about getting involved into that side of things, but I also feel like I had a realistic idea of what that would look like for me. So I got into contact with that family member, who connected me with my psychologist, my addictions psychologist. And it was really interesting because my addiction psychologist was actually a man,
Hmm.
and I feel like he was a really like good influence on me at the time. I had a lot of like trauma from the men in my life, in personal relationships, in work, in whatever.
Yeah.
So working through that, and having a man who was safe to go to and confide in and everything, like I think that really helped to kind of rewire um, a lot of the fears that I had around men for sure. It helped me process a lot of that kind of stuff. So that was good. He was also sex worker friendly, which was
Oh,
amazing. So I was able to, I don't think that like he originally was. I think just me being unapologetic about what I did for work and just being so outspoken about it and just kind of saying like, hey, this is what I do for work. I don't want to have to quit my job. I want to find a way to do it safely, and still be able to maintain my sobriety and my recovery. And he just met me where I was at and, went home and educated himself on sex work so that I didn't really have to,
awesome.
and was like a really great ally during that time. So that really helped to kind of boost my confidence, to be able to go forward in the recovery process and just be open about who I was and like wanting to stay involved in sex work because I think that's like such a common thing that ends up happening with a lot of people that go into recovery is they're told that they need to quit working,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be that way.
No, and it's not
um,
realistic sometimes too. I mean, I know sometimes, and I think it's almost like a stereotype too. You know, suggesting to quit our jobs because there might be a bit more exposure to alcohol or some kind of substances. I just feel like it feeds into that old stereotype that we're all addicted or we're all high on drugs, and we can only operate if we have, say, a glass of wine or something, something along those lines, right? So
the reality is like there's so many careers and industries where people struggle with substance use and need substances to cope with their jobs, and I think it's more so about instead of quitting what you do for work just trying to figure out healthier ways to cope with that. So that was something that I was working on. I started going to 12-step meetings right away just because they were the most accessible. I have a lot of religious trauma from my childhood, raised super Christian. So that wasn't something that I wanted to stick with long term. The 12-step meetings are very much rooted in Christianity, and though they are extremely helpful for so many people and they're such accessible meetings, it just wasn't something that I thought was going to be super helpful for me. And yeah, so I sought out alternative meeting options, which in Calgary was really nice because that was really accessible at the time. We had meetings like Smart Recovery, which is a science based cognitive behavioral therapy
oh, cool.
um, kind of meeting.
Yeah.
So that one was really nice. They give you like little worksheets of like different things to work on for your mental health and how to get organized and how to have your personal life balance and just all of that kind of stuff, anger management, like all of that. So that was really cool. There was also a meeting called Recovery Dharma, which was a meditation and Buddhist based recovery meeting, sort of influenced by the 12 steps, but then taking away the Christianity piece and putting in Buddhism and mindfulness.
Yeah.
So that one was really great. I really enjoyed the people that were involved in that meeting. So that I kind of like got really immersed into that community right away. And I started to volunteer to facilitate some of those meetings as well. So I would just, come in and open the doors and start up the meeting and lead everyone in conversation, but just kind of like let everybody talk kind of thing. So yeah, that was really cool. I found that those meetings, and this was really funny because like before, I never thought that I would be able to do public speaking. That was like one of my biggest fears. Fucking hated speaking in front of other people. Like I mentioned, I have social anxiety, so like that type of thing was really terrifying to me. But I think there's something about going into a group of people, and this could be a group of 5, 10, sometimes 30
Wow.
people in a room. So it could be a small meeting or a big meeting, and to be there emotional, crying, like just be like absolutely vulnerable in front of that many strangers,
Mhm.
I think just like again started to rewire some of those fears, some of those valid trauma that I had from, social situations or getting embarrassed or embarrassing myself through my addiction, whatever. It helped to rewire that to make me more comfortable with vulnerability. It helped me to be more comfortable into speaking in groups, and to be in leadership roles. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, just kind of like moving up naturally from just like going to those meetings to like facilitating them later and volunteering with the organizations that put them on and going to different events and helping organize different events. Just seemed like a gradual process that made sense for me.
Totally. How long were you in treatment for?
Oh yeah, so I also went to treatment. I went to a women's only rehab center. I was in treatment for, I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 weeks. Again, like a whole other blur. That was in 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, early 2019. Like I went into treatment in February.
Mhm.
So I had gotten sober originally in September of 2018, and then um, had to was on the wait list for treatment that entire time until February and was able to go in. So
Wow.
going to those meetings was helpful to like get me through until I had to go to treatment. Um, but yeah, I think 6 to 8 weeks. And then when I got out of treatment, I still had continuing care, which was just counseling once a week. You'd come back to the treatment center. So you're already out living your life, and you come back to the treatment center and just do group therapy with a bunch of people that were in treatment with you, and your counselor that you're comfortable with. So
Wow.
yeah, that was really nice. And I did that for about 8 months after I graduated from treatment. So yeah, just a lot of a lot of treatment, a lot of meetings, a lot of therapy.
Right.
Um, yeah, a lot of
Such a
counseling and
journey.
stuff. And
Quite
yeah,
the journey. Like, I mean, it's anyone struggling with substance abuse or substance issues, like it's not easy, first of all, to quit. So I have so many questions for you. First of all, like you mentioned your roommate getting really scared for you. Was that kind of a pivotal moment for you, or was like that the final wake up call for you, or was there anything else that just kind of contributed? It was just like, okay, this is it. Like this is too much shit's going on, shit's hitting the fan. I need to do something to take care of myself, kind of thing.
yeah, I think like I really hate using the term high functioning. I think people kind of overuse that term in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think like a lot of people can understand what I'm talking about when I say like a high functioning addict, of somebody who is still able to get to work on time, is still able to kind of like function while I'm using, like even though I might be like really obnoxious or doing kind of erratic behavioral things, I'm not like passing out or throwing up or getting into like a lot of dangerous situations that way. I'm not drinking and driving, like those types of things weren't happening. And so a lot of my friends and family thought my behavior was normal. They thought that it was just going through like a partying phase. So it's harder to identify when you have a problem when you're still able to like function in your life. But it was getting out of control. It was affecting my health. It was still affecting my relationships. It was still affecting my work. And so when it started affecting my roommate, who was my best friend, we're best friends to this day. We just don't live together anymore. But um, when it started to affect her and I started seeing the turmoil it was causing her, that's when I kind of started to snap out of it a little bit. And I was just like looking um, outside of myself a little bit more and realizing the impact I was having on the people around me. And once I started looking for the impact I was having on people around me, I started realizing, like, oh, that's been there all along. It's just that I was kind of justifying it in my head before. Yeah.
Was it affecting like the work with your clients as well?
Yeah, I have a few stories about like getting too intoxicated with certain clients, like clients that also maybe had substance abuse issues that would invite me over and we would just drink together. And then I would go and see another client immediately after that, and I'm drunk. Like I'm wasted. Like how good could my service possibly be when I'm going to do that? Especially since a lot of the service that I offer is like girlfriend experience, companionship, sitting there and being an active listener, and really holding space for my clients. I do that a lot. So not really being able to provide that type of service, and they're still paying me to be there. I think I made a lot of people really uncomfortable.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that could be pretty damaging as well. And then also just like, yeah, feeding into that, um, there's a lot of clients, I think, through those agencies that had issues with substance abuse. And so it kind of just all feeds into each other of like, I'm going to spend time with them while they're using. and then I'm going to use with them, and it's just like feeding into this toxicity in both of our lives, and it just wasn't good for anybody.
No, like,
Yeah.
do you still find yourself in those situations or, like, still, like, with those same clients? Or, like, and if so, like, how do you handle that?
So I think I'm pretty lucky with how I transitioned out of working with agencies into independent work, how I developed boundaries around my work life. I put on my website that I am sober and like in recovery from alcohol specifically.
Wow.
Please do not bring alcohol to my house. Please do not show up drunk. I have turned clients away before. I have declined to take bookings before from people based on those factors. I've also noticed that if a client is kind of having sort of like impulsive booking. So they'll try to like book me super last minute. And you can kind of tell that the behavior is really impulsive and they're sort of using me to cope with something that they're dealing with in their life. I turn down those bookings as well. I actually don't even offer same day bookings when I'm in Calgary. Unless I'm touring or something, like I don't like to do same day bookings, and that includes my virtual services as well. Because I was finding like I don't really want to be used as somebody's way to deal with, um, not even like to deal with, but just like like avoiding things. Like I don't want to be your way of avoidance. Like if you want to come see me because you're stressed out and you need to decompress and you need to just like relax and have a good time, or you need me for companionship, or you need me to, I don't want to be something that is being used similarly to substances as part of somebody's addiction. So to avoid that, I do this that way. Um, Not to say that there's any like morality around that. It's just more of like I notice when I start seeing clients that are feeling that way, it triggers me in my recovery. So I just try to avoid it in general. But yeah.
Like, I mean, speaking of recovery, like, what has been the most helpful for you in your own personal recovery journey? Because you mentioned a lot of things. You've done so much, so
Yeah, I think like the main thing I would say is just the brutal honesty with my friends and family. Um, and the community building, like literally just pulling myself out of isolation and getting connected with community. In my early recovery, that was the recovery community, that was with meetings, that was with people that I went to treatment with. Um, and now it's definitely the sex worker community, it's the roller skating community, it's different advocacy and activism communities, it's the harm reduction community. So like,
yeah.
yeah, really like honing in on community and community building and just constantly keeping that up. That is definitely the most important thing
Yeah,
for my
that's so
recovery now.
important. Like, well, one, just to have a sense and feeling of belonging, and as you mentioned, to get yourself out of this isolatedness, being alone, having to like suffer alone or to go through things alone where you can't talk to anyone. Like that's really hard, and I think that's one of the hardest things in our jobs is that thing, especially in that I find this happens so often with a lot of people that are starting out in sex work. It's definitely something I went through when I was a sugar baby many years ago, just not having anyone to talk to because like no one ever did what I did. I couldn't talk to anyone because I was looked down upon. So it's just like this like vicious cycle of just you constantly getting pushed into being alone. So I'm really curious to hear about these support groups because I wish that was something that I had back in my day. And like, of course, now there's like the Twitter community, there's Reddit, there's like so many communities that are online. But like, I'm really curious to hear specifically about the sex worker support groups that you are involved with, but and also even how you even heard about these too.
Yeah, so originally there were a few people local in Calgary, one of them being a good friend of mine, Sultry Miss M, who was putting on workshops kind of teaching about BDSM and kink, and then also content creation. This was like pre pandemic, so this was before OnlyFans started getting like super popular. Like it was around for sure, and people were still using it. It was still already established, but it was definitely before like what it is now. So I went to a couple of her workshops and then met some people that way. And so that was a really cool way of meeting other sex workers. locally and meeting her. And there was somebody else at the time that was kind of doing different free activities that you could come to where you would learn. We did like a self-defense class. We did a workshop on taxes and things like that. So um, getting connected with the community that way. We also had just like random like sex worker. Um, there was an agency of sex workers, more of like a collective of sex workers locally that would put on like orgy parties. So they would have their orgy party and you would bring your clients with you, and you could just play with a bunch of different providers at these parties, and that
Oh,
was a really good way
cool.
of networking as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of that kind of stuff, like it just really helped me like make friends in the industry, and get connected with people. And then when I was doing all of these support groups in my addiction, or in my recovery, I mean, to do with addiction, I started realizing that like I wasn't as comfortable talking about work in co-ed spaces, so in spaces where there was men and women. I didn't know if I was going to be running into clients. I didn't know if I was going to be running into people who like knew who I was, or maybe try to look me up later or something like that. So I didn't feel comfortable like being completely honest with these people. And then also I was finding that there was things later on in my recovery that I was like, okay, like I don't really need to be talking about like early stages of recovery anymore. I've been sober for about a year now. I kind of want to talk about like how work has been affecting me. I kind of want to talk about the difficulties with the stigma in our industry. I kind of want to talk about how difficult it is to date as a sex worker. I kind of want to, like I wanted to talk to other sex workers about these issues. And so at the time I started reading a book called Thriving in Sex Work, by Lola Davina, and I really liked it. I have a really difficult time keeping my attention to like read a book all the way through, especially a nonfiction one. Um, so I was just reading like a couple chapters here and there, and I had posted on Twitter like, is there a support group out there somewhere for sex workers using this book? Because that would be so cool. And it was really funny because Lola ended up actually like responding to that tweet.
Oh,
And I just like had a total fangirl moment and was like, "Oh my god, like I love you so much." And
no.
she was like, "If you want to start one, you should. Like if
Yeah,
you guys want to start this type of meeting, like you have my blessing, please go for it. Like that would be awesome."
that's so cool.
So yeah, sure enough, I just started hosting support group meetings at my house. I already knew how to facilitate a support group because of being in the recovery community. So I just invited a bunch of local workers over to my in call, and we had tea and snacks and
I love
read a chapter from the book and just had open discussions about it. And we did that, I think, like once a month for like quite a few months. And then when COVID hit, we weren't able to see each other in person for a really long time. So I ended up moving the meetings online to Zoom. And when I did that, it opened it up.
that.
So it wasn't just people in Calgary could come, it was people from Vancouver, from Toronto. We started getting some people from Los Angeles and from Scotland and from Miami. And so it was really interesting. And like the group still stayed like relatively small and tight knit, but it was just really cool every time we would get a new person coming in every once in a while. And we started having those meetings twice a week, every week for months on Zoom.
Wow.
Um, yeah, the friend that I mentioned, Sultry Miss M, started co-facilitating with me so that I could take time off
Yeah,
from doing,
like
because I was doing these meetings like twice a week, every week for quite a while. So it was really nice to have some help. And then another good friend of ours, Sadie the Hunter, who's also a content creator and sex worker, she started helping to facilitate meetings. Now there's three of us that facilitate them over Zoom, and we do them twice a month. And yeah, it's
so
been really good.
freaking cool. Like, may I see the name of the group as well?
Yeah, sorry. So because of Lola Davina's book, Thriving in Sex Work, we started calling the meetings Thrive. And then when I made the Twitter account, I called the group the Thrive Hive because it was kind of a nickname that we were all kind of talking about within the meetings. I've realized later that there's a lot of like sex worker organizations called like Hive or Swarm
Hmm.
or like something to do with bees. Like it's really cool how that's happened. Because I found that later. I was like, as soon as I made that group, I was getting all of these like requests for these other sex worker groups, support groups, and organizations, and they're all bee themed. And I
There's a
just thought that was really, really cool. Yeah.
That is cool though. I mean, like when you do have new members, is there like a vetting process so you know it's like they actually are sex workers, not some rando out there trying to creep in? Like, can you tell us about that as well?
Yeah, so I do all of that myself. The Thrive Hive Twitter page is private. You can only follow it if you are a sex worker, and that's like one of the only places that you can get the link to the Zoom meetings anyways. So anybody that follows that page, I personally will go through, click on their profile, see if they're a sex worker. If you're not visibly a sex worker on Twitter, so like obviously like if you're not posting ads or you don't have it in your bio and you're not like you don't have a phone number or an email linked to it or a website or like stuff like that. Some people are a little bit trickier if they're just getting started out in the industry or they just have a new Twitter account, stuff like that. Like obviously there's more obvious ones where I can like tell right away that this is what you do for work. Um, and it's all facets of sex work as well, which makes it a little bit more difficult sometimes. So, like content creators, dominatrixes, strippers, even retired sex workers as well. So, like if somebody is a retired sex worker and they don't even have a social media presence anymore, I would require sort of like a reference from somebody else to vet you into the group. And then I've also like because I work with or volunteer, I don't work for them, but I volunteer with SHIFT here in Calgary. So they'll let their clients know my contact information so their clients can contact me and then they can get the Zoom link that way. So then at least I know that SHIFT has vetted people.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's typically how I go about it.
I mean, well,
And if I'm unsure, I'll just message somebody and try to get a better feel of who
yeah.
they are. But yeah, sorry, go on.
No, yeah. And I mean, like, well, now that you're mentioning Shift, can you tell us about what Shift is as well? Because I'd love to hear more about that and also just your work with them.
Yeah, so SHIFT is an organization here in Calgary. They're under SafeLink Alberta, which used to be called HIV Community Link. There's a bunch of different organizations like underneath that umbrella, and SHIFT was one of them. And SHIFT is a organization that helps anyone currently or formerly in the sex work industry. They do a lot of harm reduction for outdoor workers and a lot of harm reduction around workers who use substances, stuff like that, like safe sex supplies, harm reduction supplies for using substances, stuff like that. And yeah, I got connected with Shift, I think originally when I was working with agencies as a place to go get free condoms.
Yeah.
So I would go to Shift and get like big bags of free condoms. We all know how expensive condoms can be, especially like the internal condoms or dental dams, stuff like that. So that was really awesome to go there to get free stuff. But then I started going there to get support counseling from one of the case managers that they had. And during that time when I was getting support counseling, that was the first time a counselor had said to me that maybe I had a substance use issue.
Oh,
Sort of
great.
like, do you need help with that? So
Yeah.
I think that that was really great for me to kind of um, go and get free support counseling from somebody and somebody who was completely sex worker friendly and
Yeah.
encouraging and helpful. And so they were able to connect me to like some resources, stuff like that, which was really nice. And I think I hadn't really like been in contact with Shift for a really long time after that. That was like right when I was first got into the industry. And then when I got sober, I got reconnected with Shift by doing their Shifting Perspectives workshop, which is like an educational workshop they do with the public to educate people about sex work. And so I had done the Shifting Perspectives workshop because a civilian friend of mine wanted to do it. And I was like, oh, I'm interested in going to this workshop.
Cool.
Actually, I want to see what they have to say about sex workers.
Yeah.
So I went in as a secret mole, and it was actually I really enjoyed it, and I thought that it was super informative and just a really excellent way of educating the public about our industry. And so I got connected with the facilitator of that workshop, and yeah, just started volunteering with Shift shortly after that, getting connected with them on different projects, and they asked me to join their advisory committee. So the advisory committee meets a few times a year just to make sure that we stay on track with what sex workers actually want
Yes.
the organization to be doing, because it's not a sex worker run organization.
Gotcha.
So they just want to make sure that they have their advisors keeping them on track. yeah, I've done lots of different events with Shift, and gotten a lot of different opportunities to guest on other podcasts, or just different like panels. I do a lot of panels for classes for the university. We've like done talks for medical students or social work students, stuff like that. So yeah, that's been really rewarding.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
then recently this year, I started doing outreach. So I will go out with one of the case managers, and we'll go to the Stroll in Calgary, which is in Forest Lawn, and just walk around in person and try to find sex workers to hand out supplies to, and just get into contact with them and try to get them resources that they might need. And then if we don't find any outdoor sex workers, we just give them to anybody who needs them. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's been really fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I try to bring my dog with me, Lucifer. This is Logan. Lucifer just walked away. He's the puppy. He comes with me out on outreach, so it's always really fun to bring him, and he cuddles up with all of the people that we're talking to, and yeah, it's a really comforting little guy. So yeah,
totally. I mean, who doesn't want a little puppy therapy, right?
right? Yeah,
That's awesome, and that's so admirable too. Like, it's just so nice to hear that. Like, it really shows that you're giving back to the community, and also just you are really getting in touch with those sex workers when they need it, and providing them with the resources that they actually need to do their job safely and effectively. So I love hearing about other like individuals that are doing this within their community, because I'm based in Vancouver. I'm not really sure what the efforts and initiatives are in Calgary. So it's really nice to hear that we have organizations out there. And I know there are a lot of listeners that are in the Calgary region as well, that are listening to the show, and probably right now as well. So shout out to all the Calgarians out there. So hopefully this can help some people too, in case they were looking for some additional support. And it also sounds like you yourself obviously are a great resource to talk to. And that's the number one reason I wanted to bring you on the show, is to speak about all of this. So I know when we were kind of chatting before we pressed record, and also, guys, or sorry, folks, at the time of recording here, it is end of June, and we just got the news last week about the Roe v. Wade being overturned, unfortunately. And I know that you want to speak a little bit about that in terms of like how that relates to our sex work too. So we have a little bit of time to kind of touch on that, and also because I wanted to acknowledge that on the show too, even though this is being released way down the line. But um, let's talk about that.
yeah. That news was super heavy. It's what day is it today? Tuesday. We got that news on Friday that that had happened, and yeah, definitely feeling a lot of heaviness. It's you feel it on social media. I really like my heart goes out to everybody in the states right now, because it's not even just women that are being affected. These are against everyone. So um, it's not even just against people that needed abortions, but just like everybody.
Yeah, seriously.
So we're going to be seeing the effects of that. I'm sure very soon. We're already kind of feeling the effects of it emotionally. And I've also just kind of been seeing the effects of that of friends of mine, and especially my colleagues in the United States and in Canada. Um, yeah, super heavy. It's always around times like these that just make me so fired up to speak about these types of topics, to break down stigma around sex and around sexuality, and around sex work. And yeah, yeah, it's like, you kind of you take the moment, you feel those feelings, be gentle with yourself, and just try to breathe through it, but then also like use it as motivation, to work towards reversing some of this kind of stuff. And also, like, I was hearing a lot of people kind of talking about, like, oh, I'm so glad that we don't live in the States. I'm so glad that we're Canadians. And, you
Yeah,
know, it's
I hear that a
this
lot.
type of thing like could happen anywhere. And there's already laws that are being passed in Canada that are trying to remove our body autonomy, around sex work and around abortion, but also just around feminism issues and LGBT issues and harm reduction, addiction, all of that. So mental health stuff. So like yeah, we just need to stay vigilant, and stay educated about these topics and keep talking about these topics as painful as they are. It's just really important.
Yeah, and stay humble about the topic too. Like, yes, we don't have that in Canada currently, but because we are in such close proximity to the States and we always often follow suit with our people in the States, our neighbors, it can lead up to here as well. So we can't be so dismissive. And also, we can't be dismissive of all the other countries that abortions have already been restricted since the beginning of time. They've never been allowed ever. So we can't forget about those folks as well. And a lot of those people sometimes can be sex workers too, right? So yeah, it's been a heavy week, days, minutes, that we don't think about this. I have feelings, strong feelings about any kind of like state interference with um, bodily autonomy, really. It just makes me so angry. And this, I'm sure I can probably do an episode on this entirely at some point, but I just really want to take the time to say that we feel for everyone in the States that might be going through this, that are affected by this, because you are and you will be affected by this regardless. So we just want to kind of mention that today on the show. But Lula, there are a few questions that came in for you. So reverting the attention back to you for the end of the show here. I guess we'll kind of go into those if you're ready for them.
Yeah, I'm so ready.
Okay, questions, Q&A, my favorite part. So yeah, this person is wondering, what are some sex worker friendly organizations in Calgary?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, Shift is super sex worker friendly. There's also the Answers Society, which is founded in Edmonton, but it's for all of central and southern Alberta as well. Um, that's like a really great organization that's actually founded and operated by sex workers.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, love to see it. Um, that's a really great one. I'm trying to think of like other like specific organizations. There's SafeWorks here in Calgary that does a lot of like harm reduction services. They're super sex worker friendly. There's the STI clinic at the Sheldon Schumer, the sexual reproductive health clinic at Sheldon Schumer. All of those nurses are super sex worker friendly. I go there all the time to get testing done, and I'm always cracking jokes with the nurses when they're giving me my swab in the back of my throat. And I'm like, remember, I told you I'm a sex worker. I don't have gag reflex. Like that, they love me there. So, you know, these are how I test to see which organizations are sex worker friendly or not. Um, it's really interesting because like I find that like obviously when I talk about me being super open and honest and out about being a sex worker, there comes a lot of like I'm a cisgender white middle class woman. Like obviously I'm going to have a lot of privilege in being able to be as out and open and outspoken as I am. That is not the case for everybody, and depending on a lot of factors, you might not feel comfortable being out and open. Okay, we don't need to dig into my couch right now. I'm trying to talk. But I just like the reason why I'm so passionate about doing this kind of stuff is because I know that a lot of people aren't able to be as open about it. And so if I can just kind of like put myself out there as a sex worker and try to test the waters to see which places are sex worker friendly, I will always do that. So
Um,
yeah,
I
yeah.
love to hear that. And thank you for those as well. We have another question here. Some rehabilitation facilities cost so much money that I can't afford it. Can you suggest some resources that are perhaps free?
hmm so there's a lot of like government funded treatment centers. The one that I went to was government funded. I did pay for my room and board there. It was about $2,000 for the fuck no, it's still like 6 or 8 weeks. I can't remember. I paid for the room and board during that time, but then the continuing care treatment that I received after leaving was free. So all of the programming, like everything like that, was all free. Um, I was on the waiting list for a very long time to get into that treatment center. There's a lot of other government funded treatment centers like that, Claire's Home, Aventa. Um, there's a few more in Calgary. The Dream Centers for Men, bunch of other, I'm sure if you just like typed in like government funded treatment centers, a bunch of them will come up. Obviously the private treatment centers are going to have a lot better programming. They're going to have a lot better living conditions. They're probably going to have a lot better, like, more educated staff, less staff turnover rates, those types of things, but they're super fucking expensive. So definitely understand that. There's also a lot of resources for like not inpatient treatment centers where like you just go in for a few hours every day or every other day kind of thing. There's a really good program up at the Foothills Hospital. There's lots of other programs like that around. Again, the waiting list for stuff like this is really, really long. It's really damaging that it's really long. And for a lot of people that are in desperate situations that just need to get in somewhere, that can feel really frustrating. So, reaching out to community resources like support group meetings, um, it can be life-saving. So stuff like that. I know it's also really frustrating because a lot of recovery-based programming is abstinence-based, which isn't always completely necessary or where people are at with what they want. They might just need help in other ways and they don't really want to have to abstain from all substances. So, yeah, just try to go in with an open mind and just like realize that you can take what you need from these types of organizations or these types of programs and leave the rest behind. You don't need to take all of the information or all of the programming. Yeah.
Gotcha. The last question here, Lula. This person is asking, is it possible to become unaddicted to substances and quit cold turkey?
I mean, yeah, I don't know what unaddicted means. Never heard of her. Don't know her. Never met her. Yeah, I think like for myself personally, I think that like the way that addiction has shown up for me. Obviously, alcohol was my drug of choice for many, many years. But addiction sometimes shows up for me in using my phone or um, fucking vaping. Every time I'm around somebody with a vape pen, I want to be hauling on their vape all the time. Addiction shows up for me in food, in exercise, in sexual relationships, in watching TV, like all of these things, right? And so there's lots of things in our lives that aren't like inherently harmful. And I don't really think that substances inherently are harmful either. It's just sort of like how we're using them and how we might not have other ways to cope with what's going on in life. And when you have multiple different things to go to cope with, that aren't substances or aren't food or aren't ways of escapism like watching TV or being on your phone, you find other healthy ways to cope with life. And if you have a bunch of those different ways to lean on, then it's not like you're leaning so heavily on this one thing all the time. And yeah, I think that that's really important. I don't think that I personally would ever be able to drink alcohol like a normal person ever again, just because I went so far into that addiction. Um, but that's not to say that like I can never take medication or that I can never have sex or I can never eat food or like, like all of those types of things. Like, I think that there's always a balance when it comes to this type of stuff. And like I mentioned, like abstinence only programming doesn't work for everybody. It works for a lot of people. And so me abstaining from using alcohol for the rest of my life, I totally am committed to that. But it doesn't mean that I'm unaddicted. I wish. I wish.
Well, thank you for all those answers too. And I know that we're kind of going a little bit over time here, but I do value your time, and that's why I'm just trying to keep us within that little bubble. But before I let you go, Lula Blue, where can we find you?
Okay, so I am on Twitter. If you're a sex worker listening to this podcast and you're not on Twitter, you need to get the fuck on Twitter because it's free and we are all on there networking with each other and it's really great and supportive and I love it. Obviously, there's toxic places, but like that's everything. There's always the balance. So on Twitter, my accounts are at Lula Blue, the Babe is my main account. I also have at Your Lula is my backup account on Twitter, just in case my other one gets deleted, because we all know it could
Yep.
happen at any moment. My website is mygirlfriendlula.com. And my Instagram is Lula Blue Babe, not without the. But if that's too confusing and too much to think about, if you Google Lula Blue, my Chatelaine article that Marcelo De Cintio wrote is the first thing that comes up now, and that's really cool because then that like has my Twitter and everything underneath it, which is
Yeah.
really nice. So I'm Googleable. Really like that. Makes it easy.
Yeah, it definitely makes it easy. Someone worked hard on those SEO keywords.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone else listening, and of course, be sure to peep all those links. Go give her a follow. Go check out her website. Go check all the things. And if you are curious where you can find me, it is Stripped by Sia on Twitter as well. Stripped by Sia on Instagram. My Patreon, it's patreon.com/stripped by Sia, or my personal, which is Sia Steph. Get at me with any feedback or comments, questions, ideas. I know a lot of you are pitching to be on the show too, so please pitch me. I really enjoy that. And where else can you find? Oh yeah, the podcast. You can find that in all podcast platforms. So you can go ahead and follow on Spotify if you feel so inclined. You can also rate it 5 stars if you really like the show, or whatever star rating that you like. And also Apple Podcasts, you can also do a 5-star rating there as well. And on Apple Podcasts, you can actually write a review, which really helps people find the show in terms of like discoverability, finding more podcasts that are similar to this one. So you can go ahead and do that. But that's pretty much it for today. Thank you so much, Lula Blue, for coming on to the show today. I had a fantastic conversation with you. And for everyone else listening, it's going to be new episodes every single Sunday, so stay tuned for next week. Thanks, Lula.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to Stripped by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia, music by Ted D, graphic design by Maria Bellandarama, and photography by Ian Dabrin.